Trisha, and I work here at the Sewickley Public Library, and I'm here today to tell you about some great resources for searching your own genealogy and family history. What I'm specifically going to be highlighting today is different ways that you can utilize the search function in these sources that you can use so that you can get the most amount of results. The first thing I recommend is that you keep all of your information in a family tree. There are several different types of family tree softwares you can use. A lot of them are free online. Ones that I know of that I would recommend myself would be either Family Search, Family Echo, or FamilyTree.com. These all do sound very similar, but if you Google any of those terms, you'll be able to find those sites. Those are some pretty good family tree specific softwares. If you're looking to just have a flowchart and turn it into a family tree yourself, there is a website called draw.io. Now that is not a family tree. You would have to input all of the information yourself, but if you feel more comfortable, you can also use that. The other thing is that there's a few resources that I'll mention when I talk about this. There are many genealogy sites. Family Search is one of them. Ancestry.com is one of them. And the United States Census is also a very big part of this process. The United States Census follows a particular rule. It falls under the National Archives, and it has a 72-year rule, which means that 72 years have to pass between each census before they release the data to the public. So in 2012, the details of the 1940 census were released to the public, and in 2022, which is now only 1 year away, we will have the 1950 census released to us. That's going to be pretty big because 10 years is a lot of time, so it's very helpful to know where someone was living from 1940 to 1950. The library also does have an Ancestry library subscription, which means that if you come to the library, and I think through March 2021 from home, you can use your library account in order to get information and have access to Ancestry library. The biggest thing that you can do when you are doing a search like this is to combine resources. There's not going to be one site for any of these searches that you find all of your information on. It's important that once you find information on one site that you start building a base of knowledge of what you have. Newspaper archives are very helpful, and that's a resource. Findagrave.com is also very, very helpful, but those are resources that are strictly just one avenue of information, so you need to use those in combination with things like the census. So my first search tip is to be aware of misspellings. I don't mean this on your end, I mean this on the digitization end. The United States Census has been digitized so you can access it digitally. The problem is that a lot of it is done through machine scanning, so things are misspelled, not to mention the fact that back then, and even today if someone didn't fill out the census, a census worker would just come to their door and write down what they said. So, for example, if your last name is Thompson without a P in it, a census worker might have put down Thompson with a P in it. If someone's last name is Fitzgerald, it might be misspelled that instead of with a G, Fitzgerald is spelled with a J. Little details like this happen all the time, so it's important to be aware that when you're doing that search, there are misspellings that can come across sometimes. Sometimes even full names will be mistaken. So if your ancestor's name is Maria, it's possible that in a census or in another document, they may have been put down as a Mary. That can be really helpful when you're looking. And like I said, that can be in the digitization, in the person who was originally taking down the information. The second big tip I have is to change up the way you search the names. So the example I usually use is I will take a fictional character like Harry Potter from the Harry Potter series. His name is Harry James Potter. That's his full name. Now, if you're searching for him in a document, he may be referred to as Harry James Potter, but he could also be referred to as H. Potter or H.J. Potter or Harry J. Potter or a variety of different combinations of those things. So sometimes if he has a document where he signed as H.J. Potter, if you search for Harry James Potter, it might not come up because you have put in more than is on that record. So sometimes it can help if you have different variations of that. And another way that you can change up the names specifically is for women that you have in your ancestry tree. As you may know, many women change their last names when they get married, and there is actually a common practice that was done a lot more back then, but it's still done a lot now, where a married woman will change her middle name legally to be her maiden name. So to stick with the Harry Potter example, sorry for the spoiler, but Hermione Jean Granger marries Ron Weasley. So Hermione Jean Granger may have changed her name to Hermione Granger Weasley. So when you look her up and you're doing that process of changing out initials versus the full name, H.J. Granger or Hermione J. Granger, she might be Hermione Jean Weasley after getting married, but she could be Hermione Granger Weasley. So H.G. Weasley versus H.J. Weasley might be the same person. The third tip I have is to double check the information that you are looking off of. It is very common when you're doing these searches, if your ancestor has a common name, that it's possible that someone with the same name was living at the same time. This is when I mentioned having a sort of base of information can be very helpful. If you have that base of information, you can sort of be able to determine whether or not the person that you found is the person that you are related to. For example, the example I have given is if your great-grandfather is named John Smith and he worked in 1910 as a steel worker in Pittsburgh, and you find a marriage certificate for a John Smith in Ireland in 1915, you can probably assume that that marriage certificate is not for your ancestor John Smith, seeing that John Smith worked and lived in Pittsburgh. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some weird situations where that ancestor could have traveled to Ireland and gotten married, but it's important to be able to look at that and try and determine if you're finding information about your actual relative or someone who has the same name. The fourth thing that I try to remind people of is that information, there's such thing as putting too much information in the search bar. So if you know that your relative John Smith worked in Pittsburgh and lived in Pittsburgh in 1910, and you know his birth date and you know his mother's name, if you put in all of this information and you say John Smith, his mother's name is Mary Smith is who he lived with in 1910, he worked as a steelworker in Pittsburgh, you put all of that in the search bar, there may be things that you're actually excluding, because let's say that there's a document that he signed as J. Smith, that might not come up because it technically doesn't fit any of the criteria. So if you switch around the amount of information you include in your searches, you can also find things there. Another good thing about the census and things like that that you can do is if you have a relative that you find out John Smith lived in Pittsburgh in 1910, then you know that maybe the local newspaper in Pittsburgh in 1910 perhaps was the Post-Gazette. So you could go to the Post-Gazette archives and search the name John Smith and see if you can find an article written about your relative. Now, if you live in Pittsburgh and your family's always lived in Pittsburgh, that's a little bit easier. But if you find out that maybe your relative lived in Columbus, Ohio in that time, then you can go to look up what Columbus, Ohio newspapers existed back then and then search for their archives and search your relative's name. The other thing that I always tell people, and this would be the last thing, is that searches should be periodically repeated. That's not to say that, like, if you do a search, you should do it again 2 weeks later. That's a pretty brief window of time, but there are millions of documents historically that are being uploaded to the internet every year. There's constantly new things being uploaded, and not to mention that the farther up your family tree you get, the more you have the possibility of distant relatives also doing the same searches. So a search you do today in February 2021, it's possible that maybe in September 2021, you have a distant relative that uploaded a family photograph that they found in their grandmother's attic of that relative that didn't exist before. Or it's possible that perhaps the marriage certificates in the county where that relative lived have finally been digitized and uploaded to the internet, and there is now more information than there was previously. The internet is always growing, and the amount of things that are being digitized and uploaded to the internet is constantly growing. So those searches being repeated can sometimes give you additional information. That's all I have for you today. I hope this was helpful. If you need any more help, I hope this video series can continue to help you on your journey to finding your family's history.